Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are watching Season 1, Episode 9, entitled Move Along Home. This episode aired March 14th, 1993. I got some warnings that this episode was maybe not so great.
Yeah.
Before we started to watch it.
Yes.
And I can see why. It is a little bit of a quirky episode, and we're going to talk about it here as we go.
I can't believe the episode gets the dislike that it seems to.
Well, this should be an interesting conversation then.
Okay.
Before we get started, is there anything from the previous podcast that you would like to talk about?
Other than it was longer than the other ones.
It was the longest recording and the longest editing I think we have ever done, even since the first episode.
But anyway, it was a fun episode. We both enjoyed it.
We could make an entire additional episode of the podcast with the things that we cut out of the first one because there was so much yammering. There were a lot of discussions about leadership, treatment of women, and I don't even remember what else. But that thing was long, and it took us a long time to finish it.
Maybe we'll release that as the Christmas special. James and Kim ramble about one episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine for 3 hours.
Well, now you've sold it, so I'm sure everybody will be writing in asking about it. All right, let's move on to this episode and try not to record for 4 hours.
Okay.
In the cold open, Sisko is admiring his dress uniform in a mirror. You don't see a lot of mirror gazing in Star Trek, so this kind of stood out to me.
He looks very natty. That is a very well-fitted, perfect dress uniform.
Yes, there's some fancy gold around the collar and the pips.
Yep.
Jake comes in. And by the way, where's Jake been? First time we've seen him, right? In ages, since the school episode. Jake comments that he's in his dress uni, and Sisko says he hasn't worn it in almost 3 years, and he says it feels a little baggy, so he's lost some weight. And Jake says, it looks great, and baggy is fashionable on Bajor. Guess who's been reading Bajor Vogue? That's what I wrote in my notes.
Fashion does seem to be very important on Bajor. I mean, we had the guy last week who did a perfect pirate costume.
Well, he wasn't from Bajor.
He
was
was.
A soldier of fortune.
He was
Could
a
have been from
Bajoran.
anywhere.
He had the Bajoran nose and he had the earring.
Oh, he was? I don't
Yeah.
remember.
Oh, he was definitely Bajoran.
Okay. Jake orders a lemonade from the replicator, and Sisko questions his interest in fashion. Jake says a lot of Bajoran girls come through the station with their families, and Sisko is like, you were just playing with the model starships a few weeks ago, and now you're interested in Bajoran girls. Aw.
Oh, Jake is growing up. He's interested in girls now.
Jake sighs. He's like, Dad, like, that's my case.
Total teenager.
He says, that was a couple of years ago. And Sisko says, we have to talk about women. And Jake's like, no thanks. I already know all about women from Nog. Great.
Oh my God, that was
a
so
great
good.
source of info.
Yeah. I think we've got the line of the show coming up, which is, obviously I have a lot of damage control to do with you on this subject.
Yes, that's what Sisko says. And he says, we're going to talk about it in the morning.
Yeah, Jake does not look thrilled at having that chat.
No.
He does say fine. Just say, yeah.
Fine.
I would make a suggestion here of perhaps Sisko could also have that chat with Bashir.
He should certainly have it with Bashir and Nog and Quark.
I think Bashir needs it the most.
Oh. So Sisko says that a Vulcan ship has made contact with a new species in the Gamma Quadrant called the Wadi. A delegation from their planet is coming to the station, and he says, you have to handle first contact very delicately. It's sort of like a first date with a girl. You have to show a certain respect. And then Jake does a major eye roll, just like a teenager. So what's the difference between this and Tosk? Wasn't Tosk like first contact with a new species? Nobody put on their dress uniform. They just told him to come on in.
I assume this is a formal first contact because the other race must have warp technology.
Okay, I'll accept that. Then Kira calls from Ops, rescuing Jake from this lesson about girls. The Wadi ship has arrived, so Sisko leaves to meet Kira in the docking bay.
Great outside shot of the ship docking at this point. I do like the outside shots of the station, and clearly they had enough model budget to actually do a ship docking in this one.
Julian and Dax are awaiting the Wadi in the docking bay, and Julian is upset because he couldn't find his dress uniform. He keeps saying he packed it, but he doesn't know where it is.
He's just stressing a bit.
Dax tells him to relax. Can't you just replicate a uniform? Isn't that how they make them anyway?
I mean, there's a tailor shop on there, and he has his measurement.
Right, he could have Garrick make one, although we've only seen Garrick one time in one episode. We haven't seen him since episode 2.
Yeah.
Dax and Kira both tell him it's okay, but then Sisko arrives, and Sisko is not okay with him not having the dress uniform on.
Yep, reads him the riot act.
Yeah, he says, this is our first formal reception, and I don't want anything else to go wrong. And he asks if that's clear, and Julian really feebly says, yes. Well, I was surprised he didn't say, yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Why didn't he say that?
I don't know.
I mean, Sisko made it clear they were going to be following the rule book here. I'm pretty sure Frowny Face would be pretty happy with that.
We do see Primmin later, but he's not in this scene.
And he doesn't seem very frowny either. Do you think that Quark acquired Julian's uniform and sold it in the flea market?
Maybe.
That's what I'm thinking.
Then the airlock opens, and out marches some folks that have taped on facial tattoos on their foreheads and very colorful outfits. The main guy is a familiar actor. His name is Joel Brooks. He's been in like 1 or 2 episodes of 100 different shows when I looked him up on IMDb. Funny. Yeah.
Just one of those classic bit part actors who appears in everything.
Yeah, exactly. He introduces himself as Fallow, Master Searchid of the Wadi.
Also holder of the sacred mullet from the 1980s.
Yeah, his hair is a little crazy.
Well, the whole beard, hair, mullet thing looks like just a total throwback.
Yes.
If you also look in this scene, he has absolutely killer sideburns as well. I mean, It's like something lifted from a mullet style album from the 80s.
Or from a hairband video. Sisko welcomes him on behalf of Bajor and the Federation, and he introduces Kira, Dax, and Bashir. Fallow says, sure. Where are the games? Take us to Quark's.
Yes, this was great. At where are the games?
Sisko looks at Kira, who just shrugs, and she says, okay, right this way. Sisko looks a little worried as they all head to Quark's. First contact is not what it used to be, he says to Dax and Bashir.
The look on Sisko's face is priceless at that point.
Yeah.
Do you think Kira takes the lead there because at heart this is a Bajoran station?
I don't know.
Because I thought that was interesting, the way they handed over to Kira to take them there.
Well, maybe the plan all along was that Kira was going to lead the escort. And then, Sisko would walk with the leader and the two of them would talk and follow her to wherever they were going. Yeah. I mean, but honestly, where were they going to go? Like, we've covered this before. There's only 2 rooms. There's only 2 places to go. You go to the promenade or you go to Ops. So Quark's, sure.
Terrorist meeting room?
Yeah. There aren't that many options, which is really strange. It makes the whole show seem claustrophobic that there's just only 2 places to go.
They need some conference rooms.
Yeah. After the theme, we're in a very bustling Quark's. And Quark is asking Dax if the visitors have money. And she says she doesn't know. We didn't ask. And Sisko says it's not the point. And Quark says it may not be your point, but it's mine.
They're getting Morn in early in this scene. When it actually opens, you see Morn walk from left to right. And then if you notice in the background, Morn is actually talking to a Starfleet officer. Perhaps we're missing something here with Morn. Perhaps he's really one of the Bajoran prophets. Because he's always there. He's everywhere.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think there's actually really more to Morn.
Sisko says, damn it. Quark, this is a new life form from the Gamma Quadrant, and I expect you to treat them with... And Quark interrupts him and says, Commander, I'm a host, an ambassador of goodwill. The more goodwill I generate, the longer they will stay, and the greater my profits. He says, I think we're talking the same language. And Sisko's like, no, I don't think so. I really like that little interchange there. So then Quark goes over to see Fallow, and he puts his hand on his shoulder asking, do you fellows do a lot of gambling where you come from? Fallow looks at his hand until he removes it, and he says, we like games.
We like games.
Okay. Quark says, doesn't everybody? He says, maybe there's some room for dabble franchising in the Gamma Quadrant. We can discuss an investment opportunity. Sisko then interrupts him, and Quark says, okay, first spin is on the house. And apparently it is a losing spin, so big surprise.
Yeah.
He asks what they'll wager on the next spin, and Fallow produces a fancy container and pulls out what looks like some dirty old breadstick. Quark says, sticks? Fallow says, Klon Peegs, highly sought in our culture. I thought he might be pulling Quark's leg a little bit. Like, oh yeah, these are super valuable. Yeah. He says they have many different uses. Sure, sticks are useful. Quark's like, I have enough sticks, thank you very much. I thought that was also cute.
Yep.
Then Fallow produces alpha current nectar, saying it's priceless. Quark tastes that and says he's not interested, even though Sisko tells him to take the juice.
Yeah, that was good.
And then he's like, the only other thing we have is just this stuff. And he dumps out a bag full of random gemstones. And now he's talking Quark's language. So he says, let's get some drinks for everybody.
Yeah, Quark's eyes looked like they were going to fall out of his head. He seemed very excited at that.
Yeah, the gems got him.
You brought something up that I was thinking that they were actually just messing with Quark.
Yeah. Here's some sticks, and then here's some juice.
What happens later in the episode, that actually reinforces what I was thinking at that point.
Maybe.
We've got a box of old breadsticks and a bottle of the cheapest wine they could find in the Gamma Quadrant.
$2 chuck.
Exactly. They strike me as the kind of people who would do that.
So after the ad break, we're still in Quark's, and the Wadi are still playing games, and Sisko is bored out of his mind. He's just sitting at the bar. He says he's been sitting there for 6 hours. And he says he's been trying to remember the name of the guy who wrote the revised first contact procedures. He's like, I wish he were here instead of me. I thought this was just, I don't know, it was almost like a filler, this part of the conversation. Because the thing he talked about didn't really mean anything. The guy that he named didn't really mean anything because they never talked about it again. I don't think there was any meaning in it. No. It was just like they were trying to show Sisko was bored and that first contact wasn't what he expected it to be.
I think that was it. They wanted to basically show that time had elapsed, they were still playing, and Sisko really hadn't had any real contact with him because they just wanted to play the game.
Right. So Sisko says he's going to bed, and if they ever get tired of playing Dabo, let me know. And he leaves.
Oh, he tells Quark to keep them happy as well, which I thought was a nice touch.
Quark then tries to convince the Wadi to call it a night because they're winning too much.
Oh, yeah, they're doing really well. I mean, they have like piles of latinum around them.
Right. Then he's like, oh, but the Dabo girl, her arm is tired. And so Fallow says, well, then replace her.
And Fallow says, we're only getting started.
Right.
That must be very worrying for Quark.
So Quark says, okay, he's going to replace the Dabo girl. And he calls over Broik, which... Who's Broik? Where did he come from?
I think that was the Ferengi we saw who was cleaning with Rom last week. So that's a big step up. That actor's now got a name. Broik.
He gives Broik a look, and Broik seems to press a button under the table, and magically their luck changes for the worse. So somebody's cheating.
So they have the cheat button actually on the table. Isn't that a little too obvious?
I wrote a note somewhere that it seems like they could have added a remote trigger.
Yeah, they got a lot of technology. Couldn't you hide the button somewhere?
We need a button right on the table.
Wouldn't Odo have a problem with Quark running crooked games?
They talked about that in the first episode, about Quark was worried about having Federation oversight on his games, something like that. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that exactly.
I thought they just told him he was just expected to play an honest game or whatever. Maybe that's just part of it. When you're going to play games of the Ferengi, then you have to keep your eye out for the cheating.
Ah.
You know what I mean? It's like it's expected. Like we were talking last week about how if you hire Ferengi, you would just expect that they were also running a side business with your customers.
Gotcha. It's like the line from, I can't remember what the book was, but it said, after you shake on a deal, count the number of fingers you have left afterwards.
Right. Now we go back to Sisko's quarters, and Jake is still up. He said he was setting up a reactive ion impeller for school with Nog. Sisko says, I don't know, Sisko takes this somewhere else. He says, Nog is older than you. He stays up later, and he probably does things, like with girls, that you're not ready for. Jake is like, Dad, we were doing a school project. I thought that was a little out of the blue.
I think they're trying to show that Sisko is now struggling with a kid who's a teenager.
Yeah, he says, I never had any problems with you, like, for example, bedtime. Until you met Nog. And Jake says, I'm 14. And Sisko's like, well, yeah, that's the one thing we agree on. Now go to bed. Jake asks how the Wadi thing went. And Sisko says he's been doing nothing but eat Ferengi low-carb beans for the last 6 hours. I thought he said that he was eating low-carb beans. So I had to go back and rewind it and watch the closed caption. It was low-carb, one word.
For the last 6 hours.
Yes. Then he yawns and he kisses Jake on the head and everybody goes to bed.
That was kind of sweet.
Yeah, it was sweet.
I thought it did show a genuine affection between the father and son.
And then we go back to Quark's, and now Fallow catches Broik, which, by the way, the iPad kept correcting to Boink. Fallow catches Boink.
That's the alternative name for him.
So he catches him, pushing the cheat button. Why do we not have a remote trigger for that? But anyway, Quark immediately takes no responsibility and blames Broik for it, calling him a disreputable swindler. But the Wadi are not really believing this story, and they all kind of close in on Quark. Yeah.
They seem pretty annoyed at this point.
Yeah. Well, I guess if games are big to you, cheating is going to be pretty rude.
Quark cannot do a good poker face. We saw this in the last episode. When he tries to pretend to be outraged or you're accusing me of something, he just can't seem to pull it off. Oh, and the actor who does Fallow, he does menacing really well.
Well, he's kind of a big guy. So after they all close in on Quark, he tells them to take a few free spins or a free holosuite visit. He says, do you know what a holosuite is? Do you have sex on your world? Now, all I'll ever think about when he says holosuite is that it's a brothel or something.
Well, you did make those comments on an earlier episode about that. I hope you disinfect them.
Oh, well, that was gross. Okay, yeah. Fallow says, we're going to play a new game, an honest game. He opens a box and then this big metal thing appears. He says the game is called Chula.
And Fallow says they're starting at the second shap. Only a child enters at the first shap.
Yeah.
He's wonderfully menacing.
And he's also kind of bullying Quark. And Quark doesn't want to look stupid or look uninterested. So he's just like, yeah, sure, I'll play this game. I'll learn as we go.
Right. So where did the Dabo table go? I think the Wadi just stole the Dabo table.
I don't know. Yeah, it's like this thing just appeared kind of on top of it, covering up the Dabo table.
Oh, no. All the Dabo table, because it had the gold pressed latinum on it.
Yeah.
All of it disappeared and was replaced by it. So I think basically this was just a ruse for the Wadi to steal the Dabo table.
Steal all the latinum and the table.
Yeah. They're a sharp crowd, the Wadi.
Then we go to Sisko's quarters and we see him rolling around in bed in his PJs. But then he wakes up and he's not in bed or in his PJs. He's on the floor somewhere and he's in full uniform and he's got a giant tricorder on his hip.
That was a nice cut, the way they did the rolls over and then wakes up in wherever he is, like in full uniform.
Yeah, he's laying on the floor in a room with a bunch of triangular tiles on the floor. That's really all we see because they show him from the top. And I immediately thought, is he in the game somehow? And yeah, that's pretty much what happens.
We don't find that out yet, though.
But I mean, my guess right away was, did he get sucked into the game somehow?
Oh, I got
I've never seen this episode before, so they made it pretty obvious that that's what had happened, even if we weren't supposed to know it. So he tries to call ops and he tries to call security and he gets no responses. He also tries end program like he's in a holosuite. That doesn't work.
That was very next gen.
Yes. He takes out his tricorder and he tries pressing some buttons next to the purple doors that surround him. Finally, one opens and he steps into a hallway of more purple doors that won't open. And then finally one does open and he sees Fallow. Fallow's standing on the other side of the door laughing. And he says, Shap 2, move along home. And you get the title of the episode.
I noticed the heavy use of purple again. Like all the doors, there's a lot of use of purple.
So Sisko asks where he is, but the door closes, so Fallow doesn't really talk to him. He hears somebody shouting in the distance, and he quickly goes down the hallway to find Bashir, who is back against the wall, and he's crying out. Sisko shouts at him, and he stops crying, and he says, oh, thank God, I thought I was having a nightmare. And he was trying to wake himself up.
I thought that was funny. He thought he was having a bad dream.
Yeah, so he was just shouting like a child. Then Kira and Dax enter and ask, who's yelling? And Bashir says he was trying to wake himself up from a bad dream, like a 5-year-old. Sisko says it's not a dream. They are guests of the Wadi somehow. Bashir says maybe it's a behavioral test to see if we can work our way out of a maze. This really irritates Kira. She doesn't want to be part of any game, right?
We see angry Kira again.
Angry Kira is not amused. Dax says this doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but Kira's like, I'm sure you Starfleet explorers find this fascinating, but I'm a Bajoran administrator, and this is not what I signed up for. She is very annoyed.
Yeah, well, I think it's because she's so very no-nonsense.
Yeah.
She's probably grown up without a lot of exposure to trivialities. Life's been about either surviving or fighting. So things like this, if it's a behavioral test or some kind of experiment, it's probably just annoying to her because she's very focused on real world issues. I also noticed that she doesn't seem to have her gun, so she probably can't shoot her way out of this.
Right. They've all got tricorders, but that's it.
Yeah.
Sisko says he also doesn't like whatever they're in, but he wants to take Fallow's advice and find his way home. Dax says, let's stay in contact with our comm badges. And Sisko says we can use our tricorders. We can check in with each other every 2 minutes. And then he tells Bashir that if that doesn't work, to just yell again and they'll find him. Little dig.
Yeah.
And then they all split up.
I think he's definitely picking on Bashir there.
He definitely is. Now we go to Odo's office and Jake comes in looking for his dad. The computer says he's not on the station. So he was wondering, where has he gone? And I guess he was really looking forward to that birds and bees conversation that they were supposed to have that morning because now he's missing him. Right. Odo tells him to go to school and says he'll track Sisko down. But I guess he forgot that school is closed because Keiko is still away. Keiko and Miles have been gone for a long time.
Well, if you were away from the flea market, would you want to rush back? Keiko wasn't very keen on the station, so I'm sure she's not rushing to get back.
Right. Jake says he was going to go to Airlock 3 to watch the Bajoran transport passengers come on board, and Odo's like, oh, to look at the girls.
Odo has him figured.
Yes, Jake is all embarrassed. He tries to say no, but his face says yes. Odo tells him to go on, and he'll let him know when he finds the commander.
He's actually even worse than Quark at having a poker face.
Odo then asks the computer when Sisko left the station, but the computer says it doesn't have that information, which is an interesting answer from the computer.
I do like how Odo maintains a sense of calm, even though he's concerned about where Sisko is, and keeps that up in front of Jake. I think it sort of speaks to Odo's professionalism in that kind of situation.
He doesn't know yet to be worried.
Do you think so?
No, not until Jake leaves, right? And then he finds out that the computer doesn't know where he is or when he left the station. Then I think he gets worried, because then he goes to Ops to check in with Primin.
And Frowny Face is still there.
And Frowny Face, Primin, is in a very jolly mood. He does a Constable Odo in a goofy voice, which is strange.
He does not seem to be very professional in this regard.
It's very weird. Odo asks him where Kira is, and Primin says none of the senior officers reported to duty this morning. He's very jovial, saying he heard the Wadi party went all night. And then Odo asks him how long he's been a security officer, and he's like, 6 years. Why? And he says, lost many commanders in that time?
I know, this is a really good point. I mean,
Yes.
Primin does not seem to be very professional in this regard. Shouldn't he at least be checking in with the senior officers? I mean, also, if there was a party last night and you're dealing with Starfleet personnel, at least one of them could be suffering from alcohol poisoning.
From the synthale?
Yeah.
Primin looks very confused by this question, and Odo says, Sisko is missing, and all of the senior officers may be missing. He tells him to run a sweep and check with the ships that left.
This is good deflection from Odo as well, because as Odo, as chief of security on the station, why didn't he know that the senior officers were all
Yeah, he didn't know
disappearing?
either. Yeah, exactly.
That's good deflection there. Oh, this is your fault, Primin.
Primin says, yes, Constable, and Odo's like, don't call me Constable. I'm Chief of Security. And he says,
Ooh.
yes, sir.
More grumpy Odo.
Now we go to Quark's, and I wrote down that the Wadi are playing with their sticks.
Yeah, they're all holding
were
the sticks.
Tapping the sticks together
Perhaps they do have some value or cultural significance.
for tapping. They also seem to be sort of growling at each other. The whole scene was weird. They're like tapping the sticks and making noises. Fallow says the board is ready. Make your last wages. And he asks Quark what his bet is. And Quark asks what the minimum wager is, because he's clearly unsure of the game. And everyone groans. And then he gives Quark the dice and he tells him to roll. He says, you'll learn the rules as you play. And all the Wadis start clicking their little sticks together rhythmically. Quark rolls and Fallow yells, Chula. He says, your pieces will meet the Chandra. Quark asks if that's good or bad. And Fallow says, neither. And both, which is helpful.
He does like to talk in riddles.
Well, is this like Dungeons and Dragons? That's what I thought. It's like, oh, great. But then Fallow sits down and he starts pressing buttons on the game, which is not very Dungeons and Dragons. And he invites Quark to sit down as well. Then we go into the game, because now we know who's in the game. And Sisko is trying all of the doors unsuccessfully again. He hears a child singing and he follows the sound. He calls the others and they find a door that opens with a little girl bouncing around and singing. Allamaraine, I don't know, all these different things, whatever. She does her little song and she's bouncing. Oh, she's kind of hopscotching around and singing this song. Dax tries talking to the kid, but she just keeps hopping around, totally ignoring Dax. Kira, because she doesn't have a gun, decides she's just going to walk past the kid, and she gets zapped by some kind of force field.
Yeah, she's not messing around.
No,
she just wants to get out.
She doesn't want to play. She just wants out.
Yeah, I'm not playing your stupid game.
Sisko grabs her and she says she's fine, but why can the kid go through it, but you can't just walk through it? And it's like, well, obviously it's because she's hopping on these specific marked spots on the floor. So Bashir tries the hopscotching and also gets zapped.
He almost does it. He's on the right path.
But he gets zapped too. And then Dax says, no, you didn't do the rhyme that the kid is saying. So then they all, one at a time, have to do this. They do this little hopscotch thing and they're like bouncing on the little spots on the floor and they're doing like the little dance with their hands and all saying the rhymes.
Yeah, they're having to do the hand movements too.
It looked ridiculous.
Well, what's funny is Sisko looks very sort of nonplussed while he's doing this.
Yeah.
He's got this look on his face that says, geez, really? Really?
Yes.
I thought that was kind of funny.
I think that was the actor saying, really? This is what I'm doing in the show?
I went through this in the read-through. Are you going to really make me do it?
Yeah, I can't believe I'm hopscotching. Do you know who I am? Oh my gosh. Kira seems very pleased to have gotten through that little test.
And they all had to do the hand movements too.
They all had to do the whole thing. It was very silly.
Yeah.
And as the door closes, the kid says, Allamaraine, third shap. Shap seems to be another word for level.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Then we go back to the game, and Fallow yells, Allamaraine, and moves the pieces on the board. Everyone cheers, and Quark gets some gems, so he looks pleased with himself.
And there's lots of bashing the sticks together going on.
Oh my gosh, the sticks. When we come back from the ad break, Fallow tells Quark to choose the path, short or long. The short path doubles the peril to the 4 players, but also doubles his winnings. Quark is like, double the winnings? But Fallow says if one of the players doesn't make it, he loses. Quark says, we should get this game here all the time, and wants to discuss licensing.
I like the way Quark says, I see where you find this game interesting. And again, Fallow very cryptically says, do you? I think the actor is great here. He gives this sort of sense of aloofness and sort of menace, almost like he's dealing with a child.
Well, Quark is kind of a child.
Well, yeah, he doesn't quite understand, what's going on and what's being said to him.
Well,
but is pretending to, oh, yeah, I know what's going on.
To me, what's interesting is how they make him quite menacing.
Yeah.
And he's kind of a big guy, and he's, he freaks Quark out a couple times. Some of the times, haven't happened yet, but he sort of freaks him out. But ultimately, the whole thing is not really that menacing. I don't know. We should probably talk about this at the end.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is I forgot here that he said, if you lose, or if one of the players doesn't make it, you lose. I forgot about that because later when he loses a player, he doesn't lose. They keep playing.
Oh, that's true. Huh.
Maybe he just meant in the second shap. I don't know. I'm trying to make up rules for a game that doesn't exist.
Okay, yeah.
Somebody probably played this game.
Yeah,
just like people are playing Quidditch.
It depends. I mean, Fallow, as the dungeon master, can modify the rules as they play.
I guess so. Odo comes in now asking about Sisko, and Quark says he went home to bed last night. Odo says 4 officers are missing. What do you know about it? And it suddenly dawns on Quark that it's the same number of pieces in the game. I thought that he made that leap awfully easily.
Yeah, I had the same opinion here. It seemed like a very speculative leap. I mean, and Fallow didn't even give any hints.
No, he didn't say anything.
And even the colors of the pieces didn't even necessarily match the characters' uniforms or anything like that.
He and Odo both look at the game pieces as Fallow says, bet or leave. Quark asks Odo to take his place, but Fallow says choose the path, and he picks the safer path, which elicits groans again. There's a lot of groans in this episode from the crowd.
Yeah, I can't decide if that's the peanut gallery or they're just hecklers.
So Quark rolls the dice again, and they go into the game, and Kira is annoyed about the whole thing. Rhymes and riddles, what's the point? It's a game, Dax says. Home must be the end of the game. Then Sisko says, we're just pawns. He has no idea. You really are just pawns.
Dax was the first one to figure out that it's a game, so they're showing that she's the smart one in these situations.
Then a door opens, and there's a bunch of Wadi in a very smoky room, and they're all having drinks. And the NPCs, they don't respond, they just laugh. They're just laughing and drinking, so a normal party. Kira throws a plate on the floor to get their attention, but nothing. Nobody even moves.
She'd had enough of this.
Then there's a close-up of the smoke coming from the walls, and everyone starts coughing. Well, not the NPCs. The NPCs are all fine. Then Fallow appears, laughing and telling them to drink. Sisko says, we aren't playing anymore. Move along home, Fallow says. And he keeps laughing as they all start choking.
Yes.
Then Julian grabs one of the champagne glasses and drinks, immediately feeling better. It's the antidote, he says, passing it to Kira, who then gives it to Dax. Sisko grabs one too, and then Fallow does a weird clap with the back of his hand, and he says, Shap 4, pointing at a purple door.
Sisko had given Bashir an order not to drink anything. But he broke the order.
I mean, self-preservation is an acceptable reason to break an order, right?
Bashir isn't actually full of himself in this scene. Did you notice the joke he made to Kira where he said scientific method? Actually, I took a guess. So that was surprisingly down to earth for him.
Yeah, maybe he'll be less annoying from here.
A more likely scenario would be him saying, well, of course I knew it was that.
Jeez. He didn't creep on anyone either in this episode. It was very strange.
Oh, yeah. Maybe Sisko had the talk with him.
He had the talk about the birds and bees with Bashir instead of with Jake.
Yeah, maybe that's the bit they cut out at the beginning where he said, Jake, I'm going to have to give you the talk I gave Bashir.
I thought this, I don't know. So we know that they're in a game.
Yes.
And so we know that they have to do something in order to get to the next level.
Yep.
So the thing they had to do in this level was drink?
Yes.
When the guy told them to drink? This is the worst game ever made.
Well, nobody said the Dungeon Master was any good in this.
Oh my God. There were times during this episode where I just thought, why? What is happening?
Well,
Why are we watching this?
Well, I think I know what your rating's going to be.
But there were some times later where I was like, oh, this episode's okay. But there were just like these kind of moments where I thought, oh my goodness, this is really bad.
Well, I think that was actually kind of deliberate there. I think part of the reason for this was because their natural reaction, or maybe their training, Starfleet, etc., would be not to drink or eat anything in that situation in case it was poisoned or whatever. Perhaps part of the game was to force them to abandon that order or that mandate that they would typically follow. So they were maybe, as the game, testing them to see how far they would go. Would you choke to death on the smoke rather than break the order or break the rules and actually drink something, even if one of the characters in the game is telling you, you need to drink this to win?
Okay, that feels like a stretch.
It depends on how aware the Wadi were of Starfleet rules or regulations or technology and things. And it seems like they are pretty advanced, so they might know these things. And it's fairly clear that the Wadi not only like to actually play the games like that, but play games with people.
That is a serious overanalysis of something that seems, I don't know, shallow, shall we say?
Well, that's kind of what I do. So
okay, fair enough. So back in the game, the smoke now disappears from the room and all the laughing Wadi disappear and they walk through the next door. Fallow moves the pieces down a level and shouts, Allamaraine! And Quark cackles while Odo looks very irritated. And we go into an ad break.
Fallow does seem to be quite happy with the progression to the next level. I thought that was also an odd happening of, is he enjoying playing this game? I mean, is that part of the Wadi's enjoyment of this, of watching the game progress? Or is it just he's enjoying messing with them?
All right, back in Ops, Odo has Primin scanning for human life signs on the Wadi ship, which is very smart. Primin says he's seeing some kind of intense bipolar current, but he doesn't know what it is. He says it's like a transporter signal, but it's constant. Odo says he's going to take a look himself, and Primin says it's Starfleet policy that you can't storm into their ship without permission. Odo doesn't care because he's not Starfleet, which is pretty funny, and he tells Primin to beam him onto the Wadi ship.
I think that shows the advantage, certainly for Sisko, of having somebody like Odo around.
Well, and Kira, too.
Oh, yeah. They don't have to follow the Starfleet rules.
Yeah.
You could turn a blind eye to them doing covert things and saying, well, I don't actually command them directly, and they were following the norms for their society.
So you know how we've gotten some emails from people telling us about how things work in the military?
Yes.
And, and then they're saying, so that's how it would work in Starfleet. And we're kind of going, yeah, but it's not like this is the U.S. military. It's not the Navy or the Marines or whatever. It's Starfleet. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
Well, the corporate person in me, I'm not a military person, but the corporate person in me would say that when you have like consultants or people who are employees of other companies within your employee, they are still required to follow the same standards and laws that your company has to follow. That's how it works.
That's a good take.
So, if somebody's going to send me an email telling me all about the military, I'm going to tell you all about corporate America, where I know all kinds of things.
Okay. I don't know whether it's a threat or a promise.
It's a promise. So now they show Odo sneaking around, obviously on the Wadi ship. He's scanning doorways. He opens a door and a really bright light stuns him for a moment. Well, I find that so interesting because he's a shapeshifter, so it's not like he has normal eyes. So I just thought it was funny that the bright light stunned him. Those are the kinds of things I think about.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. I think it also shows the Wadi have security as effective as Deep Space Nine. He's just wandering around on the ship and there's no security officers or alarms going off.
Yeah. Except what he does is he jumps through that door into the light and then he ends up in Quark's somehow.
Something I always like is watching for innovative effects on the show that are obviously easy to do and probably very cheap, but deliver a decent effect. And I thought that was pretty funny of them just having obviously a bright light behind the doorway and then Odo sort of on one side of it. So you don't need any other set or any machinery or anything built. Right. It's like, we just put this bright light and have it look like you jumped through it.
Yeah, I don't think they spent a ton of money on this episode.
Yeah.
Like, all the people standing around in the smoke-filled room, I don't think that cost them a lot of money.
Oh, well, they were all the same people that were in the party.
Yeah, in the Quarks. Right, so when Odo appears then in Quarks, Fallow gives him a knowing look like, don't be snooping around in my ship.
Oh, I thought that was a nice try.
And he tells Quark to choose their path. Odo says this game is over, but Quark tells him to stay out of it. He says everything's going fine. Quark chooses the safer path, and he rolls. They're not really dice. They're whatever the little things are that are the equivalent. And Fallow says, oh, that's an unfortunate roll. Meanwhile, in the game, Bashir is getting cocky. He's like, we've gone from the second to the fourth shap already. So aren't we winning? Kira is like, you are not taking this seriously. But Bashir says he's finding it highly motivating. Like, he's enjoying it.
Yes, he does seem to be a little bit cavalier.
Then they start hearing some noises, and Dax says she's reading high magnetic field variations with intense flux patterns. I could never act on one of these shows because I cannot pronounce all these words. They're all simple words, but when you throw them all together, it's a big mouthful to me.
I imagine the read-throughs are something of a nightmare.
Yeah, maybe. Something is coming towards them. Sisko says to find cover as some ominous lights appear and start flying toward them. Then a bright light shines on all of them as Fallow dramatically moves the blue piece of the board and knocks it over. Julian is then completely zapped out of existence, and Sisko shouts, Fallow! Now this is where earlier he said, if you lose one player, you lose the game, but they keep playing.
Okay. My interpretation of this is if you lose a player in one of the scenarios or they fail to complete it, then you've lost the game.
Yeah.
But if a dice roll takes one of your players away, then you can continue the game. It's not the same as failing to complete a scenario.
Okay.
That's how I think the rules work.
Yeah. Odo asks what happened, but Fallow says that he can play next time, that he's not the one playing this time. Choose their path, he says again to Quark. Quark says, I want a shortcut. Odo shouts, wait, but Quark says it's the right thing to do. He says he knows what he's doing. Odo is annoyed that he's trying to make himself rich, but Quark is like, no, look at the board. The shortcut skips a whole level. He says with the shortcut, they can advance all the way home with one move. Trust a gambler. And Odo's like, fine. Which
my comment on this is, what if they're not a very good gambler?
Yeah.
And let's bring up the small fact that he's only playing this game because he was caught cheating, because he was losing.
Oh, yes, that's totally right. But I mean, if you think about it, if you were putting yourself in peril, I guess his point is choosing the longer path. Everyone is still in peril because he lost Bashir, even though he took the safe path.
Yeah.
So what's the difference if you do 4 of the long rolls versus 1 of the short rolls if they're in danger no matter what?
Oh, yeah, agreed. It makes logical sense. But Odo could, within his rights, pointed out that you're a bad gambler.
Because he got caught cheating.
Yes.
Then Quark gets Odo to blow on the dice, which was very amusing. And he rolls, and Fallow says, Thialo, sacrifice 1 so that 2 may live. And Odo is not amused by this.
Oh, this, though, is a classic Star Trek ad break. Because, they all do that look.
Oh, yeah. The soapy thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it leaves on a real cliffhanger and then boom, into the ad break. I was like, This is classic Star Trek.
So Quark then becomes very melodramatic and he says he can't choose. He doesn't even know which piece belongs to which person.
Yeah, Fallow is quite insistent.
He tries to get out of the whole thing by saying he's learned his lesson. He won't cheat ever again. And he starts begging and he goes all the way down to the floor. It's very overdone.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of difficult at this point because Bashir is gone. So the easy one to remove is out. He can't pick Dax because then
he loves Dax.
Yeah, who would he creep after?
Yeah.
And he can't pick Sisko because he might end up with a Starfleet stick in the mud who'd close his bar.
Oh,
yeah.
I see.
Then the final part is you can't pick Kira because I would be 99% certain that even after death, Kira would come after you.
So after all the tears and histrionics, Fallow says, very well, we'll let the game select one at random. Last wagers for the final move.
For the first time, Quark was actually convincing. I mean, his whole little histrionics bit actually appeared to work. And if you didn't catch it, the face of the woman standing behind Fallow watching is priceless.
What was she doing?
She's got this look on her face of sort of like, ew.
Of Quark?
Yeah, looking
funny.
at Quark.
I thought he was just being melodramatic. Did you actually think he was being serious?
No, because of the way he immediately pops up.
Yes, and he's like, oh, really? I don't have to do it?
I thought it was him actually, for a change, actually being convincing in his deception.
I gotcha. So back in the game, they hear Bashir shouting that he's found a way home, and they spread out to find him. Dax finds an open door that's like a big rocky cave, and the room shakes, and she falls, getting her leg kind of caught between some rocks. Sisko and Kira come in, and they pull her out, and they're like, oh, nothing's broken, but she's obviously hurt herself, because from here on out, she's limping. And then we see someone with a really bright light behind them saying, it sounds like Bashir. And he's saying, what's taking so long? Come on, come this way. Sisko says, we need help, Doctor. But then the figure turns into Fallow and he says, Thialo, move along home. Shout 6. And the ground rocks. And Kira checks her tricorder and says, we're over a fault line and the cave isn't going to hold. So the three of them start trying to get out of there and they're pulling Dax along because she's really limping. Now they're following some kind of rocky trail and they end up on the edge of a cliff and the earthquakes continue. So they keep trying to hold onto the wall and not fall off.
Yeah, there's lots of camera shaking and things collapsing.
Yeah, I was going to say it just looks like the camera is kind of at their feet looking up and the camera is shaking, making it look like, like they're high up on a cliff.
I'll just say it's lucky they're not on a Federation vessel because with that kind of shaking and things, a ceiling beam would have fallen on someone by now.
Oh, geez, for sure. Then they sit down and Sisko throws a rock over the edge of this cliff to see how far down it goes, and it's a long ways. And Dax says, just go. You just leave me here. You can jump across and be fine. She says, I can't do it. She says, the cavern's going to collapse and kill all of us. They're like, forget it. We're not going to leave you here. And she says, 7 lives is enough for a Trill, and you haven't even lived one.
I thought she was being very serious there. I thought
she was being serious, but we've been talking a few times about how many lives has she really lived. And here she says, 7 lives is enough for a Trill. Now we have the number from her mouth instead of from somebody else's mouth.
Well, the number that she's admitting to.
Why would she make it up?
Because Odo said it was 10. I believe Odo.
Okay. Sisko says he couldn't live his life knowing he had left her behind, especially in a goofball game and a goofball episode like this. That would be upsetting.
I think in the last episode as well, we saw Sisko isn't prepared to leave crew members behind.
Right. Dax says, don't let sentiment get in the way of command decisions. And Sisko says, I've heard that somewhere before.
It was a hard lesson for Troy to learn.
Oh, geez. Dax says, if you were hurt, I'd leave you behind. And Sisko says, well, it's a good thing I'm not hurt. That was pretty funny.
Nice touch. I did like this. I think it goes to the heart of the Sisko character. I mean, he's not just a rule follower. He's not prepared to just give up and go with what the rule book says of, oh, you're supposed to leave the injured person behind if you can escape. I mean, I think there's a great quality to that character. It balances out the other sides of him that we've seen because we know he can get angry about things and, he can sometimes not be the perfect leader, but he does have this sort of loyalty to his people. And I think this is the second time in 2 episodes that we've seen it.
Sisko tells Kira to jump across and says, he'll go with Dax and find a way around. Kira's like, forget it. I'm helping you. We're sticking together. Sisko says, I gave you a direct order. And Kira says, so court-martial me. And then he says he can't because she's not in Starfleet. And Dax says she'd court-martial both of them if she could.
Yeah, I'd worry about Dax being in charge because I think she'd be a rule follower.
I don't know if she'd be a rule follower, but she'd certainly be tough.
This also is starting to show more of Kira's character, that she'll stand with her colleagues.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that Dax and Sisko have inspired that level of confidence in Kira already, that she's prepared to put her own safety at risk to help them.
Yeah, either she's been inspired by watching how Starfleet operates, or she just knows what it means to stick with your team. That's my guess, right? Is that she's learned that in her freedom fighting ways, that you stick with your colleagues.
Right. I think her background would point to her doing that, doing the right thing rather than strictly following orders.
The cliff gets very narrow and the ground keeps rumbling, but they hold on to each other and keep going. Only a few more meters, Sisko says.
This is definitely like living in California. Lots more rumbling, ground shaking.
So they almost make it out before Kira falls over the cliff and they pull her up, but then they all fall off at the same time as they scream. And then they land in Quark's, including Bashir. All of a sudden, everybody does.
They all go over the edge into the bottomless pit.
Yes. And Quark shouts, they made it. I won. Nope. All of your players were lost, Fellow says. And they take back all of the gems, and Quark wins nothing.
We get to see some great angry Kira here. She is not happy.
Right. She says, wait, we were never in any real danger, and the Wadi all laugh. It's only a game. Then he zaps his game back into a box and says, time to move along home.
That I thought was great, where he said, it's only a game.
Really? You, the person who has complained about every cheeseball ending that we've had on this show since the beginning, you thought that was good?
Yes.
Wow. That was the cheesiest of all of the endings.
No, I thought it fitted perfectly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I thought it fitted perfectly with these people. It seemed kind of jerky, and they were all sort of laughing.
Yes. You just thought it was fitting. I see. Okay.
Yes.
Not so fast, Sisko says. We take first contact very seriously. And Odo interrupts him saying, you should ask Quark how this all started. Quark. And of course, Quark takes no responsibility for anything. He says, oh, they just had a run of bad luck and they blame me for their losses. Odo's like, that is not what you said before when you were groveling on the floor. And Quark says, oh, right, you were here for the groveling. That was my favorite line of the entire episode.
Yes. Odo called him out for his cheating.
Yes. But Quark denies the whole thing, like it never happened. And Fallow says, you'll have to excuse us, perhaps someday a rematch, and then they leave. Quark says, hey, this game could work here, and he runs after Fallow to, I guess, franchise the game out, and then the end.
He did get his Dabo table back.
Did the Dabo table just reappear when they took away the other game?
Yeah, it reappeared, and it looked like all the Latinum was still on it, so he got his stuff back.
We got through this episode really quicker than any of the other episodes that we've watched and talked about, especially the last one where we took forever. Yeah, it's surprisingly fast. So I'm going to move us right into the over-analysis section, and let's hear what you've got to say about Move Along Home.
Well, basically, Fallow was a dungeon master, and they were playing an updated version of Dungeons & Dragons.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it seemed like they were playing some kind of advanced board game, and looking at the Wadi, when the first thing that they were really interested in with the games, it certainly says in some interesting things about their culture and their society that they seem to be a very game-focused. That's why I think there's some pointers at the beginning to, like with the sticks and with the wine, whether those were jokes. Whether they knew they were worthless things. They were just messing with Quark because it was part of a game. And I think the other thing that was interesting is I would assume in that kind of society, things like cheating would be serious offenses and would be, really looked down upon. I mean, almost to the point of you can lose a game, but cheating is unforgivable. The actor who played Fallow, I thought, did a great job. One of the things that seems to be almost amusingly consistent across all the episodes we've seen so far is the guest stars have been great.
Yeah.
And have really sort of fleshed out the characters that they've had. I like the way in this episode Fallow managed to maintain that sort of menacing persona throughout the whole thing. And the way he dealt with Quark as well. That, to me, just worked. I did enjoy that.
If you look at this episode as a whole,
yes,
and somebody asked you what happened or what was the point, how would you describe it?
I would describe it as an episode that showed a first contact with a race that is very focused on playing games and plays games in all their contacts with people. So they look at the world or the universe through their game playing. So everything they've done in this episode maybe was just them playing a game.
So you think, from their perspective, the first contact was about seeing how the Federation... No, it wasn't the Federation. Well, yeah, I guess...
Yes, it's the Federation.
But the Ferengi aren't in the Federation.
No.
And Bajor's not in the Federation.
The Federation was making first contact. They were first greeted by a formal Federation delegation there.
It's confusing because what I was going to say was, so you're saying that their assessment of first contact would come from how they behaved in a game.
Yes.
Except this wasn't exactly just with the Federation. It was with whoever was on the station.
Yes. I doubt they made a real distinction between Federation and non-Federation. They were maybe making more of a generalization between people of the Alpha Quadrant versus people of the Gamma Quadrant.
I think I see what you're saying. It feels like a stretch to me. The episode itself was just so goofy.
Mm-hmm. I think it appeared goofier than it meant to be. I totally see what they were trying to do here. And I think what you ended up with was an episode that looked more goofy than serious. But it was actually kind of a fun episode. I think it was interesting that you got to see more of the Sisko and Dax relationship in terms of Sisko was not willing to leave her behind, which is progressing that character of Sisko. I mean, he's showing that he doesn't want to leave people behind. He isn't prepared to lose crew members.
Yeah.
And almost the opposite. Dax, by her own admission, seems like she would follow the rule book and be more likely to leave somebody behind.
Well, I don't know. Or was she just saying that to try to convince them to just move on?
That's a good question.
She was putting up a tough front.
I was looking at it as that was real.
I can see how you would be a bigger fan of this show if you could look at something like this, which I felt was really shallow. If you could look at something like this and find some deep meaning to it, I can see how you would be a bigger fan of it than me. And maybe I will feel differently as we go farther along and the characters develop more and we get a little bit more of a, overarching story arc. Yeah. But from my perspective, this was a really kind of dopey little episode. The biggest problem that I had with it was that there were no stakes, ultimately.
But you didn't know that.
You know, they zapped Bashir, but you knew Bashir wasn't gone, right? I mean,
I didn't know it. It could have been in that episode. I mean, he could have been one of those characters that dropped out through first season. They got rid of Tasha Yar halfway through season 1 of TNG.
Yeah, I suppose. But I think even at the end, when you found out there were no stakes, that, I don't know, I felt like I got yanked around a little bit. Like, oh, ha.
Yeah.
Just kidding. No big deal. It's just a game. Whatever.
Well, that's kind of how I saw it. It was just a game, but the players didn't necessarily know that. Fallow was kind of teaching Quark a lesson. There was also development of Quark in this episode as well, because he wasn't prepared to sacrifice the players for profit.
Right.
And even though he could have potentially made more profit, it was interesting that he didn't grab that first. He was actually seemed genuinely concerned about the people involved.
Was he? Or did he just not want to be responsible for anything? Because he doesn't really take any ownership or responsibility for anything.
True, but then he could make the profit and say, I was just trying to get them out. You know, I was just trying to complete the game. It was kind of a win-win for him in that situation.
Maybe that was the point of this episode, was to give a little more depth to Quark.
Yeah.
Although I didn't really see it.
I guess this is the point of me doing this part of the show. Of these are all the things that I take away from it, and pretty much everyone else in the writers probably go, no, I didn't see that. It was just fun.
No, it was just fun. Exactly. It was just a silly little episode. No, I doubt anybody would say
it's because my kid plays Dungeons and Dragons, and I thought it'd be funny to do an episode like that.
Gosh, maybe.
And then leading on from Quark, I'm wondering if Fallow had some way of telling that Quark was not as cold-hearted as he seemed and wouldn't sacrifice the others for profit, because he seemed to genuinely be torturing Quark. If Quark didn't care about the people and was just interested in the profits, that would seem like a pointless endeavor.
Well, I guess that's hard to know. If the point of the Wadi playing the game was to kind of get an assessment of the people around, then that's one thing. But if it was just that, hey, all they're interested in is playing games, then to them, there was really the whole thing was just kind of silly and trivial.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It's very difficult to assess what their motivations were in the context of just this 46 minutes of this show.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Is that it for your overanalysis? I will say this truly was an overanalysis of what seemed like a very shallow show.
Well, and I think my final part...
Oh my gosh, you have more?
Yeah. And I think my final part... by the way, I'm leaving that in. I think that'll be funny. Oh God, you have more. And I think the final part of my analysis is, so when the Wadi play this game, do they actually play the pieces as themselves?
Yeah.
So do you play it with friends, one of who controls the game, and you actually play in the game and then you swap over or something like that?
You know, if you look at it that way, I can almost see your point that maybe this was a whole thing about learning a little bit about the people and the culture and it not being a game. Because that's a good question. If you know that there are no stakes in the game and you know that it's kind of, it doesn't really mean anything, is the game that interesting? And the answer is, I don't know. Because if part of the game is you go into a room and then you have to know to drink the drink, I mean, that's just really stupid. That's kind of a pointless game.
Yeah.
So maybe the whole thing really was intended as some kind of a test of the people and the people around them. Okay, I'll give you that. Okay. Although I don't know what he learned.
And Dax brought that up at an earlier point of, is this a behavioral test? Because we learned several things from this.
True.
One, that they try and follow orders, like the drinking thing, which they will abandon the orders if it's a life or death situation. They learned that Quark, even though he says he's big on profit, won't actually kill people or allow them to die just purely for profit, which seems odd considering he hired the Soldiers of Fortune last week. But then again, in his mind, he was just a middleman. Right. And on top of that, you also learn things like Kira, even when ordered to abandon the others and go and get herself out safely, will do the right thing and stick with them. So there's loyalty there. And also that Sisko does not want to abandon Dax. But at the same time, you also learn that Dax may want to follow the rules and potentially would sacrifice them if it was the other way around. On top of that, I'll add one final thing, which is Odo will also go to bat to try and find where the senior officers are and where his comrades are.
Well, Odo likes order.
Yeah.
And his people had disappeared, and he was going to find out why.
Yeah, they learned something about Odo. And like you said, when Odo appeared in Quark's, the way that Fallow gave him sort of a knowing look.
Yeah.
So it looks like a goofy episode, but there is more depth to it.
Okay.
And I think that finally sums up my overanalysis.
I think your analysis was longer than the walkthrough of the episode.
Ah.
I'm not sure. I'll have to check the times. So for the Women in Future section, I don't have a ton to say here, but I will say that what I liked about this episode is that the female characters were just parts of the story. They weren't subject to any creeping that we've seen in pretty much every previous episode. There weren't a lot of stereotypes. They weren't the ones who were hysterical. Quark was the one who was hysterical, even though it was a false hysteria. So I appreciated the fact that they were just parts of the team. And they worked just as hard as the male characters to get themselves out of the problem. And in the end, they were willing to sacrifice themselves just in the same way that the men were. And I thought that was great. That's just exactly how it should be. Team players,
yes.
Everybody.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think it showed the bonding of all the characters in this one quite well.
Yeah, so that's funny that maybe the weakest episode that we've seen so far, and this is maybe the best Women in the Future section we've had.
In your opinion of the episode weakest?
Well, I mean, there just wasn't a lot of depth in this episode. And there wasn't even a lot of analysis for us to do kind of scene to scene. I can see overall what you're saying about what the Wadi might have been trying to do as part of their first contact. I can see that. But still, there wasn't a lot to evaluate in terms of like the interactions between the characters. Yes, we introduced one new guy in Fallow, but really that was it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there just wasn't a lot of new stuff to chew on, I guess. So when I say the weakest, I'm referring to the word I've used a couple times, which is shallow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to the rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral? What is your rating?
Absolute thumbs up. Definitely.
Wow.
I really enjoyed this episode.
Okay. Good for you.
This was an episode where I really don't necessarily understand why people think it's so bad. I mean, it's actually quite good. It's fun. It's sort of goofy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are some things you can take away from it that are actually good. And I found it enjoyable. I found it funny. I mean, maybe it's because I kind of like board games. That's my take.
I'm not sure what rating to give it. I'm on the fence. I didn't feel like I got a lot out of it. At the same time, I was so happy there wasn't any creeping on the female characters, but that's not reason enough to point a thumbs up. So I think I'm going to give it a thumbs down.
Really?
I just didn't feel like I got a lot of interesting stuff from it. And also, there was the ending was super cheesy to me.
Really?
The fact that there were no stakes, and when the guy was like, oh, it's just a game, haha. And I can't believe that didn't bother you after how much you've been bothered by the cheeseball endings of the last episode. And then,
but I thought that was a perfect ending.
Earlier.
For this particular episode, the lack of the stakes in the game just made it.
Well, it worked for you. That's okay.
Yes.
Again, I didn't think it was terrible. It didn't do anything for me. It didn't move me in any way.
Oh, okay.
And the way that they had to get out of the different things within the game was just silly. Like, oh, I have to drink the champagne. Okay. It's not like it was any kind of a test of intelligence or skill. It's just the guy told them to take a drink, and then they did.
And what's funny is that was a higher level shap. When the second shap was more difficult, where you had to figure out the little girl was saying the rhyme.
Allamaraine.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
She was saying the rhyme, and you had to do the hand movements.
Okay, that is it for Season 1, Episode 9. Come back next week for Episode 10. In the meantime, if you'd like to tell us your own overanalysis of this or any episode of Deep Space Nine, or if you just want to say something nice, you can email us at rebingeit@gmail.com. Or you can tweet us at Rebinge. Also, check us out on talkthroughmedia.com. You can leave feedback for us there. And also, you can listen to any of our other awesome podcasts.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.